Hello all, my name is Tab and welcome to my YouTube channel. The Type 74G Kai is a Japanese rank 5 premium tank released in War Thunder Update 1.87. Now, in patch 1.97, at its fairly new battle rating of 9.0, is it still worth playing? It is very similar to the entry Type 74 that can be grinded in Japan's Tier 5, but it has a few modernization upgrades that were intended to improve its performance in real life. In-game, that translates to the Type 74G being equipped with new armored side skirts, thermal optics, as well as a new reverse gear that allows it to go slightly faster when reversing away from the myriad of threats that this tank can face. To get my opinion out right now, I think this tank is really good. It's easily one of the best tanks at 9.0, and it can certainly carry games if well played. Despite this praise, that doesn't necessarily make it a good purchase for you. If you want to skip to my final verdicts on whether or not you should buy this tank, feel free to jump to this point of the video. However, if you want to hear more in-depth stats to understand why I feel this way, feel free to stay for the rest of the video. Like my other should you buy videos, the format will stay the same. I'll judge the Type 74 by its mobility, armor, and firepower. I'll actually start with the mobility on this tank. It's squarely in the average category. For the 9.0 bracket, it's just enough mobility to beat out the slower nations such as Russia and Britain, but Germany, Italy, and France will run circles around the Type 74 in most cases. That's not to say that this tank is slow, however. The Type 74's engine puts out 720 horsepower while only weighing about 37 tons. This puts the tank at about 19 horsepower per ton, which is on par with the Leopard L44, but to me it feels a lot more sluggish in anything but a straight line when you compare the two. The acceleration on this tank feels less than stellar, and other fast tanks are able to side scrape and peak corners a lot more efficiently than this tank can. Once it's up to speed, however, it'll match a Leopard in top speed, and will only be a few kilometers per hour slower than a Leopard in combat conditions. Another gripe of mine is that the transmission seems to suffer from a weird bug involving constant gear shifting, meaning there's a noticeable loss of speed if you attempt to turn or quickly adjust to targets in close quarters. The tank itself also has a fairly high turn radius, but this is only notable in specific situations. In close quarter knife fights, these mobility issues can quickly turn into a liability, as side scraping in this tank can be a bit of a pain against more responsive enemy tanks. With its new BR of 9.0, the Type 74's mobility can't help but just feel okay. It's fast enough to keep up with tanks at its new BR, but at 9.3 and up, most things will start to outpace you. As such, you can't really exploit this tank's mobility as much as you could when it was 8.7. You'll have to keep this in mind, as when you get up tiered, you have to play a lot more cautiously to compensate for your average mobility. As for the armor, to say the least, it is not good. I'm not going to bore you with the exact details, but at this BR, armor is irrelevant for most shells. The only real positive aspect of the armor is that it's surprisingly resistant to autocannon fire from the front. Compared to its contemporaries that are mostly vulnerable everywhere from the front, most lower pinning shells can only go through the driver's optic, while higher pinning ones can only manage the gun mantlet and the previously mentioned driver's optic. That's not to say that you should go out and push autocannon vehicles haphazardly, but it's nice to have in a pinch if one pops out in front of you. Both chemical and composite rounds will chew through your armor, and the only real defense against this is to either not be seen or not be shot. Use cover and expose yourself as minimally as possible, and try to get the jump on enemies instead of reacting to being fired at. That's pretty much all there is to say about the armor there. As with virtually every other tank of this battle rating, the firepower of the Type 74 is easily the strongest part of this tank. It features gunner thermals, which I actually tend not to use unless I'm actively scouting for targets. It also features a laser rangefinder, which I highly recommend you use, along with your range-finding keybinds, if you plan to do any sniping in the Type 74. The gun on this tank is the venerable L7A3, which if you played any of the later tier Allied tanks, you should already be familiar with this gun. The gun ammunition is standard for an L7 platform, featuring Type 75 HESH, Type 91 Heat FS, M416 smoke shells, M735 APFSDS, and Type 93 APFSDS. The HESH is usable for hull-breaking light vehicles, but I feel like it's outclassed in that role by the higher velocity and higher pinning Heat FS. As such, I don't carry any HESH. The Heat FS on this tank is standard for 105, featuring 400mm of pin for armor at 90 degrees, and 200mm of pin for armor slope back at 30 degrees at all ranges. It's not the main ammunition you should be firing at enemy tanks, as the APFSDS will perform a lot better in that role. I carry this ammo for hull-breaking light vehicles, of which there are a lot at this BR. When the Swedish tree first came out, I actually first loaded this shell as there were so many TMLs running around, so it is very good in that role. The smoke shell is situational, and I personally choose not to use it. Considering this tank only has one smoke launch, however, this shell might be useful for some playstyles. And finally, between the two composite shells, you should be loading Type 93. It performs better in nearly every metric compared to M735, and as such, this will be the primary shell you're firing out of this gun. This shell is actually well above average for 105 APF SDS ammunition. Finally, between the two composite shells, you should be loading Type 93. It performs better in nearly every metric compared to M735, and as such, this will be the primary shell you'll be firing out of this gun. This shell is actually well above average for 105 APF SDS ammunition. It penetrates 396mm of flat armor at 500 meters, and 228mm of armor sloped back to 30 degrees at the same distance. It'll outperform M111, DM23, OFL 105F1, and M774 by a respectable margin, and it's only a little bit behind DM33 for raw penetration. This shell is an absolute joy to use, and a lot of the tanks that the lower tier shells struggle with are fairly easy to pin with this shell. If you get max up tiered, however, you will still need to learn weak spots, as you'll basically be fighting top tier tanks. The gun handling is somewhat below average in my opinion. The turret rotation is okay, being identical to both of the stabilized Leopards, while the gun depression is just abysmal for a NATO tank, clocking in at only -6 degrees. If you plan to see any success with sniping in this tank, you will have to use this hydropneumatic suspension, which I highly recommend setting your keybinds for, as you will need it to mitigate the subpar gun depression that this tank has. To summarize, you get a lot of positives from this tank's gun and gun handling, featuring thermals, a laser rangefinder, and a high-performing shell. However, it does have a lot of cons, most of which stem from the gun handling. You'll have to try your best to mitigate that in order to see success with this tank. That covers all the things I want to talk about regarding the Type 74G. It's a competent tank, but is really let down by its battle rating right now. Like my previous videos, I'll be using the same categories for my recommendations. New players to War Thunder who are just starting out, experienced players who want to start a new tree, players who are looking for a boost in their Japanese tree research, and collectors who already have most tanks and are just looking for another good tank to stomp around in. Cost still counts for a lot here, and this tank still costs $60 US. Get this on sale or in a bundle if you can. Anyway, for new players to War Thunder, hard no. Get the Chinu 2, which I hope to do a video on later, and grind the tree out that way to see if you even like it. For experienced players, my advice is the same. Get the Chinu 2 and throw a talisman on STB 1 when you get to that part of the tree. For players who are looking for a boost in their Japanese tree research, I have to give it a maybe. If you already have, or are just getting to the Type 74 and 89, I highly recommend putting talismans on those tanks and using them for tier 7 so you don't have to up tier yourself to 9.0. If you decide to pick it up anyway, know what you're getting into. And for collectors, I have to give it a no. Save your money and buy something else instead. I just can't see why you would buy this when there are other more unique and fun tanks in other trees. And that wraps up both my recommendations and my review of the Type 74G. If you liked the video, feel free to like and comment, and maybe even subscribe if you want to see more content like this. If you didn't like the video, please let me know what I could do better in the future. And as always, I'll take any and all advice for improvement. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful morning, day, or evening.